I was just getting used to a new home. I remember one thing I didn't like was oatmeal. Sitting in a high chair and oatmeal, and nap time. It was a nice home. They had just purchased the house, and this was the end of the First World War. I was probably in the first or second grade, and I got lost one time, and they sent me out the wrong door, and I wandered around, and I got way up in the hills, and finally I went into a store, and they called my folks. That was a time beginning when they did not allow you to use your left hand. You got somebody hit your hand if you wrote with your left hand. And later on, when I was a little older, why, it was the beginning of the era of the new vaccination. They were experimenting, and people died almost immediately when they were vaccinated. My teacher died the following week, and my family kept me at home, so I missed that. And I also got through scarlet fever without any medication. We had a big central high school downtown, and I went to that. We had to either hike home or take a bus. It was a very antique building, funny crossed wood floors. I didn't do too well in high school. I broke an ankle, and I was running around with crutches. And I didn't finish high school at that time. So that bothered me a lot, because I found it was pretty difficult to function without your high school diploma. I had passes, and I could travel anytime I wanted to. I was treated royally by the help, because my father was a fairly important person in the railroad. When I was a little older, I went back and forth between Duluth and New York. Well, I spent probably maybe 4 years there. I went to school first, and then I worked at the stores, did personal shopping. I did work for 1 week. This was the time of the Depression, too, and I worked for 1 week illustrating purses. And that was fine just to have a job like that, even, because the Depression was pretty bad. I had to earn some money in order to stay there. Then Radio City was brand new then. At the Hotel Pennsylvania, I saw Benny Goodman. But I loved New York. It's a town for young people. I wouldn't recommend it for raising a family. I got married. We were married on Valentine's Day. By summer, he was drafted. I had known him when we were kids in school together, and he was the clown of the class. He entertained the class, and the teacher got so upset that she locked him in a closet. He was upsetting the class. But I guess he had some thing for me, because he walked miles one night just to come over and visit me, and that was dead of winter. His hair was frozen. We traveled around the country before he was sent overseas. I lived in Missouri, in Kansas City, and I worked there for a photographer. I did actually use some artwork there. And Kansas City, I worked in the office, and nobody would speak to me because I was connected with the armed forces, and Kansas City was taken over by the military, and they resented them, and so they didn't talk to anybody connected to that. I worked alone. They stationed them in Africa for quite a while, and then after the war was over, they were delayed. They just kept them at in the shipyards there. They were just stationed in there till they could get enough of them home. It was a long time getting them back. My sister-in-law's father got him a job in Milwaukee, and so he was being trained for optical. And so he had to put in a couple years for training in optical, and we lived in Milwaukee. And then he got an offer for California. I had 2 girls then. Camille had chicken pox when we started out, so we traveled across the country with a child with chicken pox. I kept her covered up so nobody would see her, and by the time we got to the area of California, they inspect you, and they said, "She's over it now, so you can go in." And I didn't know they did that, but they keep track of people coming in. And we rented a house in Pasadena. After a couple years there, we moved, I guess, out to Duarte, and we kept moving, just like my folks did. We lived there, and we lived in other towns out there. He had some paralysis for a while. He spent quite a time in the hospital. They didn't know whether he was going to make it or not. Something went wrong with his spine. When he came out of there, he wasn't able to work anymore. And we lived in an apartment, and the people that owned it helped him. They kept him outdoors and kept him doing minor jobs, and we just survived. And then finally he was getting pretty well, so he went to work at Aerojet, and they used him for experimental things in the cockpit of planes, and that was when they were experimenting with new forms of power for planes. I don't know what all it was, but he was pretty useful that, because they needed the optical too, so he had a pretty good job there. But after a couple, and we had a new house out there, but after a couple years, he was locked into a nitrogen chamber, and it killed him. They had a thing for heads of family that were in need of a job, and it was put on by the government, and I took a drafting course. And I'd never done any drafting, and I had never had geometry. And I needed that for the drafting course. So Pam did my geometry and got me set up for the questions. And that's how I worked my drafting. I met Ralph with the Parents Without Partners. Their partners have been passed away, and I met him, and so I married him eventually, and he had 2 boys, and they're known now as my sons as Thomas and Ethan. It just bothered me all my life that I didn't graduate from high school. And I had been going to classes in Citrus College and nobody said anything. But I went and took this course that they offer, the schools offer, to get your diploma. And so I got that, and I felt better about it after I got that. More legitimate. I had to make a decision. Where am I going? I can't stay there. And my driver's license was going to run out. I had to give that up when I got up here. So I drove till I was 94. And that's the hardest thing to give up. You give up your independence. I never expected to be 100. It was the last thing I expected. But I've been very fortunate in my health.